Hi, it's Nicole, and today I'm going to be doing my October wrap-up. I don't really have any good reason for why I did June, July wrap-up, August, September wrap-up, and then just now I'm doing an October wrap-up at the end, practically, of November. That's just how it is. The first book that I read in October was Ecosocialism, A Radical Alternative to Capitalist Catastrophe by Michael Löwy. That book I read for Indie Press Project, and I have a full review on that. So I'll leave that in the description and probably in the cards. I liked that book a lot. I would recommend it, but only to certain people, probably. The book that I read after that was for the Voxer Book Club, which I think will now be hosted by Will, and I'll leave his link in the description box below. But it was my month to choose which book we were going to read, and out of the options that I proposed, we settled on I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shraya. This book I really liked a lot. It was really good at showing why it's really important to have representation, not just so that people can see themselves and blah blah blah, which is important too, but I think also just for exposing a lot of the grey areas that a lot of the time we're not necessarily immediately aware of. Things that come up that make you question the ground that you stand on in certain areas, or things that can be really validating for other people who are in those in-between areas or adjacent to them. I also felt that while this book was clearly highlighting toxic masculinity, there was also a lot of commentary on complicity and complicity of allies as well, which to me was very interesting to bring in the way that she did. One of the things that I really liked about the book stylistically was her use of the second person. While she tells these stories about little snippets of her life, things that have happened to her, people who have wronged her essentially, or people that she's interacted with and had some kind of significant effect on her or left some sort of memory which changed the way that she thinks or behaves about things. It's clearly from her perspective, and because of that we are able to connect with her, but at the same time the use of the second person I felt like puts you as a reader both in her shoes because we're seeing her perspective, but also puts you in the shoes of the perpetrator, whether they hurt her knowingly or not. You are both people in that scene. I felt like that was quite skillfully done, and it doesn't neutralize these situations, but it helps you to see them more wholly, more completely, and not unbiasedly, obviously, because all of it is very subjective, but it helps you to think about ways to see it more holistically, even though it is again, very clearly from Vivek Shraya's perspective. I also feel like while this book I think is really great, I would be very wary about people picking it up and thinking that they're going to have the trans experience in a book. You know what I mean? Like, this is just one person's account of life, and I don't think it would be fair to interpret anything that's in this book as being, oh, that's what trans people think, oh, that's what their life is like, or anything like that. This is just her experience, and I think you would have to read a lot of content or watch a lot of content from trans people to have a really well-rounded idea of that perspective, or at least as much as you can without actually being a trans person. So I think that that's one thing to keep in mind. It was interesting discussing this book in the book club because I feel like overall people liked it, though there were different issues that different people had with it. One of the things that came up was an over-sexualization in the book of other people, the way that Vivek Shraya sees other people. That didn't really register for me at all. I feel like, I mean, yeah, it's there, I suppose, but it just didn't, it wasn't super significant to me in the book. And I feel like that's just part of her perspective as a person. I wouldn't say that that's anything that I would criticize her for. And then something else that I came across on Goodreads was somebody talking about how her perspective is, I guess, interestingly, too black and white. It conflates womanhood with femininity too much, and I feel like that is also valid commentary. But at the same time, I didn't feel like she was conflating womanhood with femininity. I felt like she was explaining her perspective and how she views her own womanhood and her own femininity and how it sits with the other parts of her that are less feminine and that she enjoys being less feminine. For example, she talks about liking her beard when she was presenting as male, and she seems to feel a sense of loss about certain things like that she actually quite liked from her more masculine presenting days, I guess. And that whole thing was really interesting, and to me I feel like one of the big values in books like this is being able to get more into those kinds of conversations with other people. So that, like, it's kind of weird, but I felt like any sort of criticism or issue that came up with the book wasn't big enough for me to see as a downside to it and like think less of it, but it actually sort of added to it for me and felt like that's brilliant that this kind of work can bring those conversations out and have people like have really interesting discussions. So really great book in my opinion. I would recommend it to a lot of people. Again, I feel like you can't really recommend any book to everyone, but I really do wish as many people as possible can read this book. The last book that I read in October was The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This was a really important one for me to read, not just because it was Black History Month in the UK, and for me, I try really hard to read at least one book by a Black author in October because of Black History Month, and I feel like it would be really good for me to do something with that maybe next year. I don't know, think about how to shout about that a bit more, especially on BookTube, where I think February is the big Black History Month shebang on BookTube, I guess, if you can even say that there is anything like that on BookTube, just because it's American, but you know, there's other issues that British people face and Black Brits face and Black people living in the UK face, and so I think it's important, to me anyway, to kind of promote the October UK Black History Month thing as well. Anyway, I read The Color Purple and it's been a long time coming. The reason it's been so long since deciding that I wanted to read this and actually reading it is partly because I thought it would be a really hard read. I've heard, because of the content that is in the book, I was under the impression that it would be very difficult to read. However, it was not nearly as hard to read as I thought it was going to be, considering some of the content. I mean, I guess it would be prudent to have some trigger warnings for all sorts of sexual violence. But at the same time, I felt like those subjects were handled really well, and not at all in an obscene way or in a graphic way or anything like that. It was really good at putting those things in and having them be very relevant to the story, but also not having them be super over the top that you're trying to make your reader uncomfortable in sort of a shock value kind of way. Like that, I think some things were a little bit heavy-handed, like the way that she talks about colonialism, the way that she brings in a sub-story to discuss that. I'm realizing now, like just now from reading this book, I'm realizing that I'm not super crazy about stories within stories, and I'm not super crazy about epistolic kind of style things, and there is a bit with letters back and forth in this. I mean, there are ways that can be done that I don't mind it at all. But I think a book that's doing those things will have to work a little bit harder for me to stay on board, and I felt like this book did ultimately work hard enough that I didn't mind those things. But overall, it was a very good read, and I'm really glad that I actually got around to it, and I would definitely recommend it for anyone who's wanting to get into some modern classics of Black literature. I'm gonna leave that there and then film another video for something else. I think. So see you in a bit. Bye.